All right, good morning, everybody. First of all, I'm going to check just to make sure. Can everybody hear me okay? I'll get some thumbs up. We were
Yes.
doing this last week. There was some issues with my sound, so my son's at summer camp, so I borrowed his gaming headset, and apparently that seems to work better sound-wise. So welcome to the third session for this local assessment focus of the accelerated learning program. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put up, we did put up a Google Drive, and I'll explain that in a little bit. We'll put it up a couple more times as people come in. And in just a second, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get ready to get started. And again, just checking to make sure that everybody can see the accelerated learning presentation. I got a thumbs up. Thank you very much, Mike. All right, well, in the interest of everybody's time, and these are going to be recorded so people can access them later, we're going to get started. So Ethan, if you could just put up the Google Drive link again in the chat room, just to make sure everybody's got it. Thank you very much. Okay, so welcome everybody. So again, this is the Accelerated Learning Program, and this is again a continuation of the part of the Accelerated Learning System. In there, if you go to the link, it should take you to PDE's website and to the Accelerated Learning Program. What this is again, it's a component for that roadmap. It is an idea of looking at different systems that can be used to really kind of help push education forward and get us back on track, or maybe even into some better tracks following the shutdown of this past year and a half, 2 years. So the systems for accelerated learning, we know are broken down into the 4 components. Again, if those of you who've been with these presentations for the last couple of weeks have heard this before, but just to make sure we've got it. One is focused on high quality academics. One is supportive learning environments, establishing healthy systems conditions, and designing a system for scaffolded supports. Since about April of this past year, there have been several presentations. They can all be found on PDE's YouTube site on various components of these 4 areas. What we're taking a look at today is we're going to take a look at the high quality academics and going into depth more onto this one, into one component of this one. Like I said, each one of these, as we know, these are all very intricate systems and complicated systems. And there's lots of moving parts to them. So we're trying to focus on one thing at a time. So with high quality academics, the idea is that it's defining the instructional changes needed for a new school year and cultivate thriving data culture to ensure every student has access to instructional strategies, resources, and supports. So that's the overarching high quality academics. What we're taking a look at within high quality academics, there are kind of, again, 4 main components. The assessment part, which we took a look at last week when Nick did the assessment literacy and taking a look at how assessments were made. We also took a look at it last week with the assessment plan in terms of taking a look at for a course and how you can map out your assessments over the course of a year. Today, we're taking a look at analyzing, interpreting the data that we get. The idea is that we need to take and look at all of these systems. The next step is, so once we have reliable data, what do we do with it? So when we're looking at a good assessment, an effective assessment system, we see it's a highly developed assessment system, includes a balanced approach to using formal and informal assessments. And we talked about the use of an assessment plan last week to kind of make sure that that's happening. Classroom-based evidence showing growth over time, involving students in the evaluation of their work. Here's the key point for this session, is the adoption of a systemic approach enhances the use of assessment data to inform teaching and learning practices. So the idea behind this component is how do we really develop this systemic approach to how we look at data? When we go through things like if you're looking at the school improvement planning or comprehensive planning, and you're looking at those systems in education, they are broken up into kind of the 4 performance levels. And the 2 of them that are in the middle are the emerging and the operational. Generally, what we've seen is that in looking at schools around, the difference between emerging and operational is emerging is things are happening because you've got good people who are doing good work, but it's not systemized. It's not something that's guaranteed to happen all the time. Or it's something that's systemized, but no one's really doing it. That's the emerging. The operational is there is a system in place and people are using it. What we find with a lot of assessments is that emerging, brushing on the edges of operational in terms of really looking at and using data. So like we said, this presentation is the 3rd one in this series. The series is going to come back again later on in the fall with looking at growth data, and that's going to be led by Kristen Lewald and the PVAS group. So what this one's looking at, like we said, last Tuesday, we took a look at assessment literacy and designing local assessments. This is how do we create good, valid, and reliable assessments? How can teachers create things that truly show what students know and are able to do? The one we looked at last Thursday took at local assessment plans. How do we know that we're covering everything that needs to be covered, and we're doing it in such a way that there's multiple ways in which students can express and show what they know and how to do, and that we're covering everything in a timely enough manner? That's creating that local assessment plan. That's that 30,000-foot view of how do we get everything in that we want to do by the end of the year to show where kids are going to be, and using a lot of the understanding by design principles to do that. So today we're taking a look at data analysis and then communicating student progress. So where does this go from here? Learning targets. What we're going to take a look at today is get an understanding of what data protocols are, why the use of data protocols are part of a highly developed assessment system, and then explain how they can be used and how they can be used throughout a school district community. So what are data protocols? We know it, data are everywhere. And you can't go anywhere in a school system, school community without getting inundated with data. The trick is how do we actually make that data so that it's usable and that it actually has an impact on student learning? So data are everywhere, and to make the best use of these data, we need to decide on what data to look at. We also need to adopt some agreed upon systems of how to look at those data. We want to make sure that everybody is kind of going through the same process and going from the same page. The one practice is to develop a systems to use specific data protocols. There are hundreds of different data protocols out there. They can address different situations and different types of data, or different ways in which you're organizing your people to look at data, whether it's an individual teacher or with its team or at a school board level. There's different data protocols out there, and I'm going to share with you links to where to find those different protocols. But what data protocols are is they're a systems-based approach to studying data. It's a agreed upon way in which we're going to take a look at data and make sure that we can take that data and use it going forward. So they provide systematic approaches that schools can follow to explore data in consistent and deliberate manner. It's that consistency and that deliberateness is what's been missing in a lot of places. Like I said, individual teachers, sometimes departments, have been very good about taking a look at their data and making decisions based on it. It's that system-wide, school-wide, district-wide, where it's all across the board as to what people are doing or what's happening. So data protocols offer a structure to these data conversations. They provide for a more efficient use of time, and you can set up norms with them to make sure that all voices are being heard. So when you choose a data protocol, okay, and think of a protocol as just a plan, a pathway. There are questions that you're going to need to be taking a look at. Obviously, what data are you looking at? Is there something specific you're looking for? And by this point, we're talking about, are you looking for data on growth? Are you looking for data dealing with differences between an all student group versus certain subgroups? Are you looking for data dealing with content and assessment anchors? What type of data and what are you specifically looking for? Who's going to be looking at the data? Is it going to be done within a department? Is it going to be done overall school-wide? Is it done as a presentation to your board or to the administrative team? How much time do you have? How much time you have will determine in some ways which protocol you use as well. When you actually choose the protocol, there are also going to be other considerations. Different protocols have different roles: a facilitator, a presenter, different groups within there. So who's going to be taking on which roles? And what norms, both general norms for any talk of data conversations and also specific to the protocols. What are those norms are going to be established before you start the conversation about the data, before you even really start looking at the data. Okay. So how can data protocols be used? They can be used to guide an individual teacher to look at their data. Focal point for department grade level meetings, needs assessment, determine strengths and challenges, etc. You can use them in a lot of different areas, and you'll probably find areas, a lot of them that I haven't thought of yet. But they can be used in a number of different areas, both from individual. You could even use them as an individual part of a one-on-one conversation with a student. Data protocols can also be used to interpret assessment data, growth data, survey, any collection of data that you have. You can use data protocols. Like I said, there's hundreds of them out there. They have different formats, different variabilities that you could take a look at to figure out which is the most appropriate for what you're trying to do. So one protocol, and I'm going to go through in the next couple of slides, just an overall look at what this one protocol looks like. Then I'm actually going to share with you guys a set of data. It's in the Google Drive, and we're going to take a look at it using the protocol. I'm going to run you through a very shortened version, but of what this might look like. So one example protocol is called Atlas, and it's called Looking at Data. The general norms for this protocol, and for most protocols, are each person has a voice and each voice needs to be heard. So everybody's got to be able to has a chance to say something. Statements and discussion are only about the data presented. It's really easy when we get talking about data to start going into all different kinds of considerations outside of it. There's a time and a place for those, but we have to focus on what are the actual data that are being presented. In this case, with this protocol, there's only one major role, and that's the facilitator. And in this case, the facilitator explains the data set. They make sure everybody knows the norms. They keep the discussion on topic with prompts, but they don't actually talk about the data themselves. So they don't point out things. Their job is to keep the discussion moving and keep it on track, keep people from getting sidetracked. We joke at some of our meetings that there's the squirrel effect going on, and it's easy to get distracted and go down different tangents. And the facilitator's role is to kind of keep that from happening. Okay. Oops. Sorry. So looking at the data, when you're getting started, facilitator, again, first thing they do is they review the norms and the roles, and then they start to explain the specific data set. And by explaining what we're talking about is making sure that everybody understands what the various data points represent, what it looks like, not what it signifies, but just this is what this number means here, this is what this column means. That way, everybody's also, again, working from the same page, and the conclusions or the ideas that people pull out, what they notice, are all in agreement in terms of that. So that's the first role, is to explain that specific data set. The first component of this protocol is the describing. And in here, the simple question is, what do you see? So the facilitator is asking the group, what do you see? What are the facts that you're seeing here? And in this case, it could be, we see X, Y, and Z. We see that 30% of the students scored X. We saw that there were areas of that, so that like 7th grade showed that they were meeting the PA standard for growth in 2018. It's very specific pieces of data or specific trends, but that all has to be very specific to what's in front of them, and obviously verifiable data that's right there in front of them. So what is seen? It's not interpretation, and it's not judgments. Facilitator either does this, or if there's a member of the team, depending on how you're working it, to record those observations. One of the things to do with it is, as this conversation comes up, people are going to naturally automatically start getting into the interpretations and start saying why. You don't want to shut them down, because that's a good component. What you can do is have either the facilitator or another member of the team record those, say, okay, that's an observation, and that's an interpretation of these data. So we're going to put that over here, and we're going to talk about that next. But for right now, we're going to really only focus on what are the data in front of us. It's just a way to get keep the conversation moving, make sure the person understands that their voice was heard, but it's not the focus of this point of it. This point is to grab all that data. What are people seeing? The next section is the interpreting. So if any of those interpreting comments had come up during the initial description, now you would go to them and say, okay, we had a couple of these interpreting comments come up. Take a look at the remainder of the data that the observations that we all wrote down, and say, okay, now what do the data suggest? And what are the assumptions we can make about students and their learning? So this is the interpretation piece. And again, the facilitator's job is to guide the discussion, encouraging different ideas, open minds. Again, it's all to be about the data and interpretations based on those data. When that's done and you've got a section of those, then it's the looking at those interpretations based on the data. The next section is, what are the implications of this for student learning? What are the implications for teaching and learning? How is this affecting our students? Where do we go from here? When you're done, you end up with a concrete set of data, observations from the data, agreed upon interpretations of the data, and now a discussion about, so what is the implication? What does this imply? You can get to then, now what do we do about the data? Right. So let's take a look at this. So we're going to take a look at this. This is the atlas looking at data. I'll see if it can pop up here. So a little bit later in the presentation, you will see there's a link to this school reform initiative. Back doing the work with the comprehensive support for the schools, many of us across the state had a chance to work with the Harvard DataWise project. And it was there that we were introduced to this school reform initiative. And this is where we can find the links to all those. There's a link to this one with numbers of different protocols. So this is the Atlas Looking at Data protocol. Can everybody see that on my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Great, thank you. So as you go through here, it's what we talked about. The facilitator reminds the group of the norms, and it gives different times. So describing the data. It says generally 10 minutes. 10 minutes might be enough. You might need more. Facilitator is supposed to use some discretion on some of those. Here we talk about the fact that if judgments or interpretations arrive, facilitator asks the person to describe the evidence on what they're based, list them on a separate side so that we can keep going. Okay, interpretations of the data, and then implications, and then reflection. Obviously, we're not going to get to all of this today. It would take a very long time, but this is what a protocol looks like. So back to, I'm going to close this one off. So we're going to open up this math PSSA data. We can hope this populates soon. There we go. If not, okay. So there we go. Okay. So this worksheet is also in the Google Drive there. And you can feel free to take it and download it and use it as much as you want and switch into your own data from your own schools with these areas. What I did is I took this data from the state. So again, using the Atlas protocol, first part is I'm going to explain what this chart means or what these numbers are. So what we have here is the Pennsylvania PSSAs. This is the grade 7 math PSSA. We've got, you can see here, years 2016, 17, 18, and 19. And we have the PSSAs broken down by their assessment anchor and standard. Okay, so M7AN1. The next column, number of points, is the number of points from that standard on that year's PSSA. So you can see if you go to the total, in 2016 and 2017, there were 72 points available total on the PSSA in math in 7th grade. Okay, 12 of those points were this standard. The next one shows what percentage that represents of the overall assessment. Okay, so AN1 was 12 points. That was 17% of the overall assessment. Number tested, that was the number of students that took it in Pennsylvania. In this case, 124,000. Almost 125,000 students. On average, this is the number of points overall that were earned by students in Pennsylvania. So of the 12 points that were available for M7AN1, Pennsylvania students earned 6.8 out of those 12 points, which was 56.7%. The reason for doing this is to make it so there's an ability to have that comparison year over year and across the different standards. So you can see we've got the same thing going on for for the 4 years for 7th grade. And these are the 4 years pre-COVID. Over here, these data represent, I pulled the standards that had the highest percent of the assessment. So AR1, which was 23%, BE2, which was 19%, AN1, which was 17%, and CG1, which was 12%. And I pulled them, showed how they compared 4 years, and then down there is the graph of what those look like. So, a little interesting to try and do this like this. We'll have to do it via a chat. So I'm going to, there's my chat box. Does everybody understand this chart and what it looks like? Okay, so in doing a data protocol, this would obviously be, I would have this, given this to people ahead of time, or we would have been doing it on a big screen where everybody could see it, and we'd be not necessarily shouting out what we see, but we would at least be talking about them. This would probably be like a math department. I would do this with the middle school math department and say, okay, we've got 4 years of data here. And it's data on the math assessments based off of the standards. what do we see? So we're going to take the next 5 minutes or so here, and you guys can put in the chat box what you see. What are the data showing you?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The data that you see here on this chart for the 7th grade math PSSAs over the last 4 years, what are you seeing? What are some factual data things that you're seeing, whether it's trends, whether it's specific, it doesn't matter, but what are these data? What are the observable things that you are seeing here?
Okay, thank you.
And then when you get an idea, put it in the chat box. I'll type one in, which I kind of already mentioned anyways, but I would say, okay, improvement in standard M7B E1. M7B E1, yes. Questions for 4 standards represent over 2/3 of the PSSA questions. Yes. Scores went up. Yep. Decline each year on M7CG1. Yes. Very good. Okay, so decline from M7AN1 as well. Yes. So these are, and you're doing what you're supposed to. Now you'd obviously continue this for several more minutes until everybody had a chance to kind of say what they were seeing. And you have it all typed out. The next part would be, so what do you think this means? What is the interpretation of this? So for example, one person mentioned that decline in each year for M7CG1. Okay, so the interpretation might be, okay, or the question would be maybe what's going on with CG1. It could also be, you know, maybe it'd be at this point you take a look and see what CG1 is and start asking or start turning about, how are we teaching CG1? Or we've done a decrease. What are some possible causes for CG1 to have decreased, had this steady decrease over 4 years? Most likely at this part, it's going to start raising other questions. So what are some other things you would think of in terms of questions to be raised from this, or interpretations? Why are the data are the way they are? The next part is also a part that frequently tends to get lost. People may start taking a look at the data. They'll start understanding, oh, maybe it's because of this or whatever. But is what implication does this have on learning? So as to if M7AR1 is consistently 24% of the assessment. Need to make sure teachers focus on that area. Yes. So 4 major standards account for 2/3 of the score. Why are students only achieving a little over 50%? Okay. So these are our questions. Some of the questions might be, when are we teaching these standards? So if you're covering M7CG1, is it covered, or AR, let's see, AR we know is 25% of the assessment. Is it something that's covered only once? Is it something that's brought back to over the course of the year? I did this once with one school, and they discovered one of these is an area where they, for the most part, cover it between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And they decided that was probably not the best time of year to cover it. When I used to teach in New York State, and we had the Regents exams that we were working through, and I taught high school students American history. On the U.S. History Regents exam, it's 50 questions that cover American history from colonization up to modern days. Well, we think Civil War is kind of important, huge thing, but there's usually only one question on the assessment on the actual events of the Civil War. So we didn't really spend a lot of time on the actual events of the Civil War. We did more on the buildup and the consequences of it, but actual on the events between 61 and 65 and to what happened, we didn't get into much details on it because it wasn't covered much on the assessment. And then the major focus for the students was on how did we get there and what did we do after the fact. Same type of thing here. What are the standards? How much time are we spending on them? Are they spending the same amount of time on standard M7DS2, which has worth 2% of the overall, as opposed to CG1, which is 12%? Now you could say the DSs, take a look. Are there standards that are tied together? So for example, M7DS 1, 2, and 3 actually represent 16% of the assessment. How are they all tied together? At that point, you might want to start taking a look at different grade levels. You see that I put this together here. There's actually grade levels 3 through 8. And you could take a look at the trends across all the PSSA grade levels and see, are there certain subjects that are emphasized or not, or do they go, what's the emphasis as they go through year to year? So the thing with looking at the data here, and I'm going to go back, I'm going to close this up. The idea behind it is when you start doing this, you actually end up with a product that is based off of the data. And everybody, it's not a supervisor telling the teachers, hey, this is what we're seeing. It is the teachers coming together or the team coming together and saying, hey, these are our data and this is what we've noticed. The other thing is part of it with these data protocols is figuring out how are you going to look at specific data, or which specific data are you going to be looking at? A school could say, yeah, our math grades aren't that great, but how are you looking at them? How are you determining where they can be used? What more data do you might you need? And in some cases, you might do something like this and discover that, you know what, we need more data. We need to have someone go through and pull out different data on certain things. So I could go through like this as a school and say, okay, yeah, we're doing not so great on these subject area, these content areas, but I know we're kind of covering it well, and I thought my students were doing fairly well. I might need to then break down these data by subgroup. And is it every subgroup of student is struggling with it, or is it only certain? Or maybe I break it down and see how we're doing. Just like you do with, for example, with PVOS, and you take a look and see how are we doing for growth. Oh, like students are showing an average amount of growth, but then if I break it down into diagnostic, I see that, well, maybe my high achieving students are showing some growth, but my others are barely making it. That's the part with these data. And once you get through this first level, then you start digging down deeper into what else is available. Questions on the data or the protocol? You guys are going easy on me this morning. Thank you. Oops. Okay. So how do you choose a protocol? Well, sorry. What data are going to be studied? What questions need to be answered? Who will be looking at the data? How will the data and analysis be used? And then what protocols make the most sense? A suggestion that I do have is that maybe have a small team go through, take a look at different types of protocols and decide on a handful that make the most sense and can be used with the most versatility across a district. Download them, add your branding to them, and start this is how we look at data here in our school district. And start really training people on how to use these and consistently look at these. So they go into these, and it's going to be a challenge a little bit at first, getting people to look at them this way, but then it's going to be, okay, yep, this is what we do. We go in, we say everything that we see, and then we pull it from there. When they start doing that, they're probably going to start using it in other areas as well. So like I said, there are different types of data protocols. So if you follow the link, and it's in the drive, but the School Reform Initiative site. So here's their page for protocols. You will see here, this is the whole list of all the protocols on their site. You have a lot to choose from. I pulled out 3 just to give you an idea. So my suggestion is, as you're looking at these, take a look at these 3. But then also take a look and see, are there other ones? If these 3 don't do it, work for what your situation is, look through some of the others. So the Atlas looking at data is the facilitator shares one data set with a team. Okay. Data mining is a facilitator presents 2 different data sets to a team and ask them to take a look at one and ask them to take a look at another and then ask them to compare. So maybe we're going to take a look at 7th grade data and 6th grade data. We're going to take a comparison, or we're going to take a look at 7th grade math data and 7th grade ELA data. And we're going to say, what are we noticing about the differences between these 2 main subjects? There's a looking at data sets. And in this case, you have a presenter who shares data and their analysis to a team. So it would be, I'm taking a look at this 7th grade data. I'm centering it now out with my analysis. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's my conclusions with a team. And then the team then has a period of time to pose questions, raise questions, and discuss, to the presenter. And the presenter then has the ability to then respond back to them, basically poke holes in their ideas, get that discussion going. The facilitator's job is just to manage the questions. But the team is questioning the presenter. This is another format that might work well, particularly in the case of, like, if you had a curriculum supervisor who was presenting to an overall administrative team, or if you had a building principal who's presenting to a district team. But it could also be done with a teacher presenting to their department. But it's just that idea of, it's one person who's sharing their data and their analysis. There's still a role of a facilitator just to make sure that the protocol is followed and that the discussions are staying on track with what they're supposed to. And the presenter is going in with it. This is my data. These are my data. This is what I see. This is what I think they mean. And people get a chance to raise questions and poke holes and come to a better conclusion. So like I said, those are 3 just examples. All of them are listed on that School Reform Initiative site, which you do have the link to in the presentation. You'll notice also in the site, so there's the spreadsheet for the math PSSAs for the last 4 years pre-COVID. I also threw in the same with the state data for the ELA PSSAs for 2016 through 2019. So you got 4 years of those. And if you have access to eMetric, you can pull up your own school's information by going through PSSA. Make sure you have just the PSSA selected as opposed to PSSA and PASA. So just do the PSSA, and I believe it's the second or third one down under that then refers to looking by assessment anchor. And if you select that, you'll see how your students did, and you could plug in the numbers there. And you'll be able to see kind of how you are doing year over year for a 4-year term. So why? That's a lot of work to compile those data and then go through these discussions and then wrap the discussions up and organize them. So, but why? So if we want to improve teaching and learning, we need to understand current performance and growth. We need to understand how kids are doing and what trajectory are they on. And we cannot forget the growth trajectory. If you're looking at your school and you're saying, wow, our math PSSA scores are showing that we're about 5-10 points below the state average, that might be a cause for concern. However, if you're looking at their PVOS, the PVOS show that yes, but they are dark blue. Okay, they are well above the state growth measure, then, or they're showing significant evidence that they're beating the state standard for growth, then maybe you don't want to adjust your math curriculum if you're showing that kind of growth. It's just your growth hasn't caught up with the actual assessment yet. But you're heading in the right direction. You're heading at the rate you need to be going. It's just a matter of you now have the growth data there as well. So if we want to improve teaching and learning, we need to understand current performance and our growth trajectory. If we understand both growth and achievement, we can make effective evaluations about strengths and challenges. Where are we actually doing well? Where do we need to show improvements? People pointed out the one math standard CG7. Yes, statewide, and I've seen this in a number of schools, that number has shown a steady decrease over the last 4 years prior to COVID. Okay, what are we doing about that? Okay, are there ways we can improve how we address that standard? Is it a matter of instruction? Is it a matter of time spent on content? Is it a matter of coming back to the content? So these are effective decisions we can make based off of the data. Okay, good. Yeah. So when to use the data protocols. Data protocols can be used on obviously a wide variety of the different data. So it can be set on district-wide data. I obviously just did this one here on statewide data. You can do it on school-wide. And those same charts that I showed you there for statewide, I've done those for districts for district-wide and for school-wide. So I'd show the overall, here's how your school's done, and then I break it out by, here's how each school in your district has done. But grade and subject data, classroom level data, even student level data. You can do a mini protocol with CDT results. So your students take the CDTs. We always talk about with CDTs that one of the hallmarks with CDTs that makes them effective is doing the one-on-one conferencing with your students, having a data protocol set up where you can do that. You can actually teach the students to how to look at data, and by looking at their own data and then start coming to the conclusions. That in itself is a data protocol. And you can create and develop, if they don't have one in there, you can create one that you can use. I know the CDTs actually have several different ideas of ways you can do one-on-one conferencing with students, but do that student level data. And whether it's CDTs or map testing, but you have that assessment level data, how do you communicate that with your students? Develop a system so that it's something that you can always go back to. This is how we do it. And when you're doing it, you can then teach your students how they can also look at their own data going forward. Kind of jumped ahead here, but yes, communicating progress with students. It's a systems-based approach to studying data needs to be in place at the student teacher level as well, not just at the department or at the school or district level. They can be used for the one-on-one conferencing. The whole idea here is, yes, you want to improve student learning. You also want to improve the ability of students to understand their own data and make decisions from it. Contact information. Okay, so this was kind of quick today, but contact information. So my name is Andrew Coonrod. I'm at the Bucks IU for about a week left. And then there's Mr. Nick Poloni, who is at IU5. The materials here are all in, the recording is going to be on the YouTube site, and the links have been in the chat box throughout. For the Google Drives, those are going to remain up, so you'll have them for a long time. Questions, things I can help people with in terms of looking at data. Let me bring up this. Also, for those of you going for the Act 45, here is the information. Let me pull up a chat. The attendance link. Thank you, Ethan. Ethan just put the Google Drive link up there, as well as the attendance link in the chat.